I'd just like to welcome Inspector Mark Reilly from the New South Wales Fire Brigade. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Val.
It's a pleasure. Well, now I'm wondering if you could actually illustrate the PPR concept with an incident.
Well, I'll focus on a response where I was the operations officer for a major incident. It involved a rescue of a person trapped in a crane that had overturned in Sydney, on Sydney's harbour. It was a complex issue for a number of reasons. Politically, it's Commonwealth ground and we're a state legislated organisation, so we have to be invited on to perform the rescue. Operationally, it was complex because the operator of the crane had been trapped for a certain period of time, and as your paramedical students will know, the longer the entrapment, the greater the injury on release, or the greatest toxic shock to the casualty on release. So it was a time critical rescue. There was a number of factors that influenced the rescue, such as the tide going out. The crane had rolled over and the jib was floating on a buoy, and as the tide went out, the jib of the crane went down, trapping the casualty even more severely and restricting his legs. As well as that, there was access of restrictions because it occurred on a jetty, so it was only 10 metres wide. It was 100 metres long, but only 10 metres wide, so it limited the amount of access we could get to the crane as it rolled over.
Can you just explain the actual incident? What happened?
A crane driver had lifted a workbench off the rear of a semi-trailer, and as he slewed the crane round, because he hadn't lowered the stabilising jacks on the crane, as he got round to 90 degrees clockwise, 90 degrees to the side of the crane body, the crane overturned, trapping his leg, pinching his legs between the cabin of the crane and the flat top bed of the semi-trailer.
So what were the critical decision points for you as the incident commander?
The main decision point for me was, in conjunction and liaison with the ambulance commander, was the length of time that the patient had been trapped. We were working to a timeline that if the patient remained trapped any longer than this, and then an hour and a half I think it was we worked on, then they would have to probably amputate the casualty's legs to retrieve him. After that period of time, it was considered the toxic shock would be too severe and the patient would suffer potentially death, a life-threatening release of toxic chemicals on his release.
So upon arrival at the scene, what were your immediate thoughts?
The first thing that was obvious to me was that the restricted work area, being on the long jetty, and that also provides, because it was on a floating cement slab on top of pillars, what was the capability for jacking, because I initially thought we were going to have to jack the casualty to right the crane. Unfortunately, there was a risk that if we had jacked the cab of the crane up too high, it would overbalance, and as it rolled backwards, it might actually flip over and off the side of the jetty and into the harbour on the other side. And
so what was the eventual outcome?
We were able to start. Our first primary objective was to stabilise the crane, and that allowed, it was a safe working environment for the ambulance paramedics to get access to the casualty. They were then able to stabilise the casualty. We stabilised the crane using timber shoring on the underside of the crane, and we used an improvised rope tie down on the jib of the crane so that it wouldn't whiplash and overturn. That allowed us a safe working environment for the ambulance guys. They were able to stabilise him. Once we had that out of the way, we were then able to get another crew of rescue operators under the cab of the crane and working on the flatbed of the semi-trailer and the crane cabin to provide access and free the legs of the trapped crane driver. In my career, that's one of my most satisfying rescues, primarily because there was a serious risk that the guy was going to lose both his legs, and it was a terrible, terrible decision the ambulance paramedic commander had to make, but it was made in conjunction with a trauma doctor who had been brought to the site from Royal North Shore Hospital, and it was deemed that was there was only two options: to be released in a set period of time, or to be removed by loss of his legs. Because of the efficient operations between the paramedics and the firefighters, we were able to stabilise the casualty, stabilise the scene, and effect his rescue prior to that deadline arriving. And that chap is now walking around on both legs.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your time and sharing your expertise and knowledge with us.
Thanks very much, Val.